Hello everyone and welcome to the Ticker.com's news channel on YouTube. On this channel, we review stock markets and discuss financial news, market trends, and economic data from Wall Street to Global Street. So let's dive in. We begin our review of the global economy with key releases in the US, Europe, China, and Japan. Two key labor market reports indicated the job market is still expanding, but the rate of growth is moderate. Non-farm payrolls expanded at a slower pace in June, and additions in May and April were sharply revised down. Non-farm payrolls increased by 206,000 in June, slower than 218,000 in May, and the jobless rate increased to 4.1% in the month, the highest since November 2021. Despite the steady expansion of payrolls over the last 3 years, the labor force participation rate held at 62.6%, and the employment population rate remained at 60.1%. Both measures have remained steady over the year, indicating a churn in employment base but little improvement in expanding overall employment base. The average hourly earnings for all employees increased 10 cents or 0.3% from the previous month of 3.9% a year ago to $35. The near 4% annual wage gain is still sharply above the Fed's inflation target rate of 2%, indicating that policymakers may not be in a hurry in cutting rates in the near future. The April non-farm payrolls increase was revised down to 108,000 from 167,000, and the change for May was revised to 212,000 from 272,000. The number of job openings rose by 221,000 from the previous month to 8.14 million in May, following a downwardly revised 7.9 million in April. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics reported Tuesday. The number of job openings is hovering near a 3-year low, but openings are still above the pre-pandemic level of 7.2 million, indicating job market conditions are moderating but still tight. International goods and services trade deficit widened to $75.1 billion in May, and trade deficit widened to the largest level since October 2022 after exports fell more than imports in the month. Trade deficit widened with China and Mexico but narrowed with the European Union. Across the Atlantic Eurozone, consumer price inflation was confirmed at 2.5%, indicating inflationary pressures are waning in the currency union. Producer price deflation was 4.2% in May in the euro area, and prices fell for the 13th month in a row amid weakening energy prices. Euro area retail sales increased 0.3% from a year ago in May and slowed from a 0.6% rise in the previous month. Retail sales increased for the third month in a row, but consumers continue to avoid discretionary items, high cost of living, and elevated interest rates. In other economic news, France's trade deficit widened in May, Swiss inflation hovered near 1%, and Germany's factory orders and industrial output shrank in May. China's private service showed rising manufacturing activities, but auto sales continued to weaken despite large discounts. Japan's first quarter GDP contraction was revised sharply to 2.9% from the preliminary estimate of 1.8% contraction, suggesting deepening economic woes. Moreover, household spending declined, denting the hopes for policymakers that the rising prices and wages will contribute to the inflationary cycle, the goal held by the central bank for more than a decade. Let us review key events in global bond, currency, and commodity markets last week. The yield on 10-year U.S. Treasury fell below 4.3% after reaching a 1-month high of 4.47%, as non-farm payrolls rose at a slower pace in June, and job additions were sharply revised down for May and April. Crude oil price rose 2% to $84 a barrel and extended gains for the fourth week in a row, as falling U.S. inventories and signs of strong seasonal demand supported oil prices. Natural gas prices in Europe eased and traded between €33 and €35 per megawatt hour amid low European demand and high inventories. The euro edged lower and approached a 2-month high of $1.08 after the U.S. jobs data supported the case for the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates despite the parliamentary election uncertainty in France this weekend. The yen crossed 161 against the U.S. dollar and approached the intervention level as the Bank of Japan policymakers remain divided on supporting the currency. We now shift our attention to major stock markets in the U.S., Europe, and Asia. The S&P 500 index and the Nasdaq composite advanced for the 5th week in a row and reached new record highs amid earnings optimism for mega-cap tech companies and and broader economic stability. European markets rebounded in the hopes that the recently elected Labour Party government will continue with the previous government's plan to keep national debt below 100% of gross domestic product. The Nikkei 225 stock average extended gains for the fourth week in a row, and household spending continued to struggle amid rising inflation and near stagnant wages. Hong Kong indices rebounded ahead of the Communist Party's third plenum next week in the hopes of more market supportive measures. Indian market indices extended gains for the fifth week in a row amid economic growth optimism and sustained allocations for infrastructure development in the upcoming national budget. Let us shift our attention to merger deals, market movers, and earnings updates from the leading companies last week. Constellation Brands, the alcoholic beverage distributor, reported better than expected quarterly results. Tesla advanced more than 10%, and the electric vehicle maker sold 443,956 vehicles in the June quarter, 4.8% lower than a year ago, which helped with incentives and price cuts. Southwest Airlines, the regional airline, adopted a shareholder rights plan, also known as Poison Pill, after activist investor Elliott Management acquired an 11% stake in the company. Ford Motor Company said total vehicle sales in the second quarter increased 1% from a year ago. Paramount Global jumped 13% after media reports suggested that Skydance Media had reached a preliminary agreement to acquire the controlling shareholder, National Amusement. Boeing agreed to acquire the majority of the assets owned by Spirit AeroSystems in an all-stock deal that valued the company, including debt, at $8.3 billion. Separately, Airbus agreed to acquire a business unit of the company. In addition, Airbus, the French aerospace company, received an order from the discount air carrier Cebu Air in Philippines. Ixtron soared 18% after the chip-making equipment makers reported stronger than expected orders in the second quarter. Home builders in the UK traded higher after the Labour Party won in a landslide victory, and the new government plans to ramp up building of affordable housing over the next 5 years by 1.5 million units. Barclays, the UK-based bank, said it agreed to sell its German consumer finance business to Austria-based BAWAG. Investors are looking forward to the release of several economic reports next week. In the United States, investors are looking forward to the release of CPI and PPI data in June. Both inflation indices are expected to rise by 0.1% from the previous month. Moreover, Fed Chair Powell is scheduled to deliver his semi-annual testimony on monetary policy before Congress. Earnings season kicks off next week with earnings from PepsiCo and leading banks including JP Morgan, Citigroup, Wells Fargo, and Bank of New York Mellon are also set to report. In Europe, France, Germany, and Spain are set to release their inflation updates, and Germany's trade surplus is expected to shrink to the smallest in 7 months. In Asia, China is expected to show a strong increase in trade surplus in June, and consumer inflation is expected to struggle amid weak domestic demand. Japan's machinery orders are likely to show a rebound, and the current account surplus is expected to widen. India's inflation is expected to be near the upper end of the RBI's, the Reserve Bank of India's, range amid elevated food price inflation. You can review daily U.S. and global financial market news, stock movers, earnings releases, SEC filings, and economic updates on ticker.com and 123jump.com. You can find the latest financial books on redera.com and keep up with financial industry events on eventsinamerica.com. Review ETF and mutual fund performance and in-depth profiles on tickerfunds.com, and review market updates and stock movers in India on niveshak.in. That is all for today, and we will see you next